It's a typical day at Bestwood pub. Two young lads are leaving, chatting away as they drive off. Suddenly, two masked men appear, one taking aim at their car. The driver gets hit, but he is mistakenly targeted. The real target? The other lad, nephew to the crime bosses ruling Bestwood. The intended target, Jamie Gunn, doesn't survive the trauma of witnessing his best friend's death. His demise sparks a lethal wave of violence that grips Nottingham and ultimately brings down the notorious Bestwood Cartel and its monstrous crime hoods, David and Colin Gun. Join us as we uncover the story of this powerful cartel which wreaked havoc in the streets for years. How did the Bestwood Cartel carve its space in the underworld? On the dark, silent nights in Nottingham's Bestwood estate, the stillness is palpable and heavy with foreboding. Here, unpredictability hangs in the air. Violence needs only a nod from the Bestwood Cartel. Led by the Gunn Brothers, these self-proclaimed vigilantes enforce their own ruthless brand of justice. This was the Bestwood during the late 1990s and early 2000s, at the peak of Colin Gunn's reign of terror. David and Colin Gun ran Nottingham's Bestwood area where, according to David Gunn, police didn't come. They ran the cartel and controlled the area's illicit trade with an iron fist. Through narcotics, extortion and violent crime, the sibling duo built up a multi-million-pound empire. Their control was so profound that their firm acted as a makeshift police force in the area. It used extreme violent measures to exert justice, well, what they considered to be justice. If a robbery or burglary happened, the victims would either call the police or the Gunn Brothers or their people. The firm would find the culprits and punish them severely. Joyriding or stealing wasn't allowed. Perpetrators would suffer harsh consequences. We were no mafia, just people looking after our own. If someone is burglaring your neighbours, let's get the stuff and make them feel embarrassed and beat them. And they're not going to grass you because they'll grass on themselves. So we just put them to sleep, said David. The firm started its operations with extortion racketeering. It remained their primary money-raising activity for quite some time, where they would visit a business and ask to see the boss. Colin would tell the boss that his security wasn't very good and he can provide them with it for £100 a week. Understandably, most businesses turned them away on their initial visit. The same evening, something would happen to the business, like burglary or a window getting hit. After that, most businesses paid up. Those who didn't were visited a second time. Colin would drive up past the business, meet the boss, and simulate a gun pointed at him with his hand. It usually achieved the desired effect. The gang's activities not only wrecked Nottingham's economy, but also contributed to its bad reputation. Known as Shottingham during that time, the city was a no-go area for outsiders. There was a drop in the applications to its remarkable university as parents advised their children to steer clear of the place. Law enforcement woke up too late to the fact that these guns were out of control. The police admit now that they were preoccupied with unrelated black-on-black shootings and took their eyes off the ball as the guns came to power. The brothers had created a network of around 30 people to do their bidding. The firm controlled everything that moved on Bestwood. The brothers had attained a reputation similar to the Cray twins for their use of extreme violence. As mentioned earlier, while both brothers were engaged in perpetuating their control, Colin handled most of the affairs of the gang. He operated from a modest bungalow, however the vehicles weren't moderate at all. The brothers owned Porsche 4x4s and other flashy cars. Colin, the crime boss, had a personalised number plate with the words "Power" etched across. During this time, it appeared that the gang was beyond the law. And what factor do you think contributed to their unbridled web of power? The bent coppers. They were deliberately installed in the Nottingham force to keep Colin Gun informed of police movements against him. This factor led to a profound distrust of law enforcement. The potential witnesses and informers were scared of coming forward, suspecting that policemen would disclose their details to Colin. They were right in believing so, because that's what happened to Colin's girlfriend, Vicky Garfoot. Acting on the corrupt cop's information, The thug assaulted her, the mother of one of his 3 children, believing she had a conviction for prostitution. That was a misunderstanding though. It was a typo on the police's computer. Someone else's crime was registered against Garfort's name. Colin's other girlfriend had it even worse, but let's get into the police's predicament first. Even the police weren't safe from the Guns. The Guns made it public that they had put out a contract on the force's then crime chief, Detective Chief Superintendent Phil Davies. Can you believe the egregiousness and irony? It does take one to have a remarkable level of confidence to pull off something like this. Now, how did the monstrous brothers manage to achieve all this? Who were the Gunn brothers? The elder brother, David Gunn, started his criminal career in his teenage years. Even in his early years, David exhibited violent behaviour. According to himself, he would get very handy with his fists and fight with other schools. Then he went into burglaries and robbing garages, before getting into the most profitable illegal business of the time, which was narcotics. Unfortunately, it still is the most lucrative illicit trade. What's more, David's mother used to hit policemen with shoes when they came over to try and talk to her sons. Nevertheless, David had a brush with the law enforcement at an early age. You shouldn't be surprised by this development, are you? Burglaries, school fights and robberies do warrant a brush with law enforcement after all. Nevertheless, when he came out of prison, he noticed others were engaging in illicit trade on the estate. He decided to return to criminality and tell the existing dealers that they were no longer allowed to supply Bestwood with any drugs. In David's own words, "We just took it off them and started doing it ourselves. That's how it's been. I'll talk about it because I've done jail for it. You've got to fill the cupboards, by hook or by crook at that age. Your family needs feeding. I had 4 children. We just told them you're not doing it anymore. We're doing it and you're off the scene. The only people who sell this stuff round here is our firm. This is our job, and if anyone else does it, there's going to be serious consequences." And, obviously, serious consequences happened. People got serious beatings and people were put in hospital. While Colin had the reputation of being the most violent, David was no dove in this regard. He shared an incident where a drunken man knocked into a table with the thug's 9-year-old daughter on it. The man allegedly belted her in the eye while the family were having a Sunday lunch. David learned about the incident on the phone and went straight there. What happened next involves a level of graphical violence that can make YouTube very unhappy. So, let's just say that the drunken man lost his lips and his eyelids to David's teeth. Obviously what the man did was wrong, but do you think he deserved to be scarred for life? That too in such a violent manner? Let us know in the comments. Gunn got 4 years and 9 months for this eerie attack. Notably, this wasn't the only sentence he served. He was previously sentenced to 3.5 years for eliminating a man with just 1 punch. But apparently the prison sentences were just a walk in the park to him, as there was no stopping his violent behaviour. However, with time, he realised his past sins and seemed to have embarked on a path to redemption. After completing his last sentence, he appeared on a true crime podcast. In his 90-minute online interview, he urged people to stay away from the life of crime. He asked them not to make the mistakes he did that landed him in prison for sentences totaling 23 years. He spoke to Sean Atwood, another ex-prisoner who now runs a true crime podcast after getting released from prison in 2022. He revealed that the police have seized over £1 million from him alongside incarcerating him. While he has been in and out of prison, his brother remains behind bars, serving a 35-year sentence for orchestrating double elimination of an innocent couple. Colin was incarcerated in 2006 for conspiracy to execute John and Joan Sterland, which brings us to the second Gunn brother, the bigger monster than his elder sibling. According to his brother David, Colin's reputation preceded him as a fighter. With his massive hands, the thug knocked people out with 1 punch. People generally avoided speaking to him, lest something upset him. If anyone had a problem with Colin, they would come to him because if they went to him, he would belt them. That's just how he's always been. He's good stuff, Colin, man, but they've just gone to town this time and stitched him up. Colin Gunn had his first trouble with the law at the age of 14. He he was kept in youth custody 5 years later for crimes like burglary, violence, theft, criminal damage and driving offences. His criminal career resembled that of his older brother. The siblings had a typical criminal background: broken home, allowed to run wild, bunking off school, minor crime, going to young offenders institutions and making contacts, bodybuilding inside the institutes, release, steroids, more weights, more serious criminal activity, back inside, more contacts. A career criminal was written all over these circumstances. Interestingly, in the early days, the residents of the estate didn't have any issues with the Guns. According to the citizens, the brothers were doing what the police should have done in the first place. Along with fighting crime, the self-proclaimed Robin Hoods showered kindness onto the community. Colin would pop cash and cards into an envelope and post it to elderly people who were celebrating birthdays. One year, the brothers paid for a huge firework display on Guy Fawkes Night for all the community to enjoy. And these were not just tales shared by the firm associates, but accounts of ordinary law-abiding citizens. However, their disillusionment began when Colin started showing his true colours. When he started taking coke regularly on top of steroids, his behaviour became extremely violent. That's when petty fights and brawls ended up in brutal beatings. As for Colin, he was a muscular 6'4" thug with the backing of his equally vicious brother, but he wasn't like that always. He was sentenced in the late 80s for a series of cheque frauds worth £10,000. He wasn't this scary thug at that time. According to a former Nottinghamshire officer who interviewed him at the time, he was just an average run-of-the-mill petty criminal. There was nothing remarkable about him at all at the time, and no hint of the monster he would grow into. So, what do you think would have changed? One of the major factors in this transition was the cocktail of coke and steroids. He gave him this monstrous exterior and prowess, but at the cost of rendering him unhinged. We will get to this part later. First, let's dive into his criminal career after getting released from prison. After getting out of prison, he started taking over Bestwood in the early 90s. The thug started with protection and extortion before joining his brother in narcotic peddling. By the late 90s, he had started using weapons and extreme violence to seize control of the smack trade in North Nottingham. While his trade contracts went beyond Nottingham, his influence remained to the confines of the city. With his flair for extreme violence and cunning, he became the head of the firm. His far-reaching powers and illicit trade network amassed him a £10 million fortune through narcotics and armed robberies. The thug had a penchant for severe violence. Where others' limits ended, his just started. While many eerie incidents can be attributed to Colin, one of them involves his ex-girlfriend who had been on the run for the better part of her life. That's the story of model Jane. How did a coerced relationship lead to a lifetime of hiding? When former model Jane went to a pub for an innocent drink with friends, she had no idea how miserable her life was going to get in a few minutes. It was October 2004. After being introduced by friends, Gunn went directly to the pretty ex-model who was engaged to one of his enemies at the time. Jane claims that he'd spiked her drink, as she had no idea how she ended up in an apartment when she woke up the next day. When she woke up, Colin was there. She told him she would see him when he wanted to see her, not the other way round. I was too scared to piss him off, she said. Before meeting him, Jane was engaged to her childhood sweetheart and looking after her daughter. However, within weeks of their first encounter, Jane found herself turned into a gangster's moll. In a short time, she was mired in the dark underworld of narcotics, weapons and shady deals. It was surreal. It was just like what you see in the movies. Business deals being done in smoky basements, people being hunted down, packets of narcotics being moved around. Colin lived off people's fear. All this time there were piles of cash and backroom deals. Colin would tell her that the police were in his pockets because he was paying them off with narcotics and designer clothes. Jane, while speaking to the Mirror, said that Colin kept her there through fear and used her for information. Being a coke and steroid addict, he'd become paranoid and erratic. One night he flipped and tried to smother her with a pillow. He kept saying that she was a Fed, an undercover cop. Jane managed to escape and went into hiding. She enrolled in a witness protection program after the police learned she was next on the hit list after the Sterlings. However, she knew that Gunn paid the coppers to keep him informed. She left the witness program and fled to London. Unfortunately, her daughter also got caught in this mess. She was also on the firm's hit list, which forced her to leave the witness protection program again. She was right in suspecting that the policemen were doing Colin's bidding, as there was a leak that she had agreed to act as a witness against the thug. Even when Gunn was jailed for life, Jane still wasn't out of the woods. She remained in hiding. "I'm the one with the life sentence. I don't want to end up on a mortuary slab." Can you imagine how a simple drink can lead to one's life getting filled with misery, uncertainty and fear? But that's not the only incident of notoriety. In fact, it's one of the less violent ones, given that Jane got lucky and escaped his clutches. His cartel's notoriety rose with his own, as did their profits and power. How did the cartel carve its place in Nottingham's underworld? The Mirror quoted one detective as saying, "One thing is certain, you didn't disrespect Colin Gun. I wouldn't." However, there was one person who did disparage Gunn and paid a high price for it too. Who was this person? How did a turf feud lead to the firm's downfall? Turf wars are the sine qua non of the underworld, and among many of those in Nottingham, one eventually brought down the Bestwood Cartel. A narcotic turf row was at its peak when assassin Michael O'Brien ended up on the wrong side of Colin Gun. He targeted Gunn's nephew Jamie outside the Sporting Chance pub, but mistakenly hit his friend Marvin Bradshaw, who lost his life. While some people maintain that it was a turf row, others say that O'Brien was denied entry to a pub with its bouncers, including Jamie Gunn. That's how the kerfuffle started and led to a lethal spate of violence. While Jamie survived the hit on his life, he couldn't bear witnessing the attack on his friend, who was hit at point-blank range. Not only this, but he was so close to the victim that he had his best friend's brain all over him after the attack. He couldn't survive the trauma and went into a decline. He was already on narcotics, the same ones which his uncles were raising £1 million fortune. Eventually, his immune system weakened, leading to pneumonia and ultimately death. Jamie died within days of O'Brien getting sentenced for life with a minimum of 18 years. Just like that, these two young men in their prime lost their lives because of gang violence. What do you think about these tragic eliminations? But these two deaths were just the beginning of a series of violent incidents. Jamie's death wasn't to go unanswered. Before his funeral, Colin called a board meeting. He gathered his senior lieutenants in a pub named Standard of England. Notably, the pub has been bulldozed now, along with the Sporting Chance pub, both of which were the strongholds of Gunn and served as a meeting site for the firm. You can understand how badly Jamie's death affected Colin, that he didn't even wait for his funeral to plot revenge. Initially, the firm attempted to get O'Brien behind bars but failed. Then Colin decided to hunt down and eliminate his mother, a 53-year-old nurse named Joan Sterland, and stepfather John, who was a retired factory boss. The couple were attacked but managed to survive, after which they went into hiding. However, the gang traced them through the BT engineers who were on its payroll. While Colin's finger was not on the trigger, his mobile data placed him in the vicinity the previous evening. Apparently, he was on a recce mission. The thug was convicted and sentenced to life with a minimum of 35 years of prison in 2006. It means that he wouldn't be out of prison until his mid-70s. And even then, only if he cooperates with the law enforcement while behind bars. Do you think he would mend his ways and embark on the path to redemption? The odds of that happening are pretty low. Right after he was incarcerated, he assaulted a fellow inmate, a terror suspect, just for the sake of fun. Not only this, but he has also been troubling the justice system even from behind bars. The details of these shenanigans are coming on later in the video. Now, what does Michael O'Brien have to say about his actions? His minimum sentence completed in 2023. While awaiting his parole, he spoke to Nottinghamshire Live about his experience in jail and the reason he committed the murder. Anger is what made me fire that shot, and the fact it had been going on for so many years beforehand. and at that time the Guns were quite high up people in Nottingham. I did always believe if they got their hands on me at that time, they would kill me. There were no two ways about that, so... When asked why he thought he got on Gunn's wrong side, he said it involved his ex-partner, childhood sweetheart. He said his ex got with Gunn's right-hand man. She had his name tattooed on her back, because of which he said that he would kill O'Brien. As for what became of his empire, without its leaders, it started to unravel amid the amped-up crackdown by the police. Notably, David was cleared of the charges of Sterling's elimination. However, weeks after being cleared of the charges, he was sentenced to 8.5 years for running an amphetamines empire. Colin was clapped with a 9-year sentence for this charge, which ran parallel to his 35-year sentence. As for the police crackdown against the notorious Bestwood Cartel, it was some superhuman effort on the part of Nottinghamshire police. They conducted 81 separate operations to take down the empire, many of which were covert. These operations led to over 100 arrests and numerous seizures. Some of these remarkable operations included Operation Utah, which targeted Colin Gun, and Operation Salt, that caught the bent cops. A senior detective who worked against the Guns for his 15-year career recounted his experience as, "We sacrificed his rest days and leave, our families suffered as we grafted to bring them to justice. It was a great feeling finally to have it turned around. They thought themselves untouchable. We have proved they were not." But the actual win for the justice system was an increase in the number of families who now wanted to live in the Bestwood estate. How did the police take down the Bestwood Cartel? Raking in millions from narcotic deals and extortion rackets, driving around in flashy cars, jewellery dripping from necks and wrists, things were going pretty well for the Gunn Brothers. But you wish we could say the same for the Bestwood estate. When violence rose to terrifying levels, people getting hit every other day in broad daylight, the authorities finally decided to take action come what may. The challenge was not just the bent cops and intimidated witnesses. The police were also intimidated by the firm, so much so that the offer of double time couldn't get them to patrol the area. Isn't this a travesty of the state's authority? The police finally dismantled their empire from the bottom up via multiple operations. Taking out their foot soldiers, the police were keenly waiting for them to slip up and make mistakes. Finally, they discovered moles inside their ranks. Corrupt officers Charles Fletcher and Philip Parr were identified, who helped Colin Gun to access secret files on the police national computer to see how close the net was to him. Both officers confessed to this conspiracy, which continued between 2002 and 2005. Fletcher was recruited personally by Gunn even before he joined the police force. He was placed into the force as a clean skin. That's how far Colin's tentacles stretched in law enforcement. So much so that undercover cops and intelligence agency officers were sent to gather information on him. One such undercover cop had many chilling details to share about how he infiltrated the crime baron and his evil narcotic empire. Undercover cop who infiltrated the Bestwood Cartel. When Neil Woods was assigned to the Bestwood Cartel case as an undercover detective, he must have been aware of the danger. However, he didn't know he would soon have a knife held to his groin by the firm's lieutenant. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it's not the only crazy experience Woods had during this assignment. Woods worked alongside one of Gunn's top men, known as the Lieutenant. He was serving with Derbyshire Police but was sent to Nottingham in 2003 as the city reeled in the wake of an explosion in violent crime, much of which has been since attributed to Gunn and his associates. According to him, the reason the crime had reached a crescendo was that Colin was at war with everyone else. Nevertheless, after getting the assignment, Woods approached a foot soldier who was a petty thief and smack addict. You might be wondering why he didn't go for the big guns right away. That's because the foot soldiers are usually both dealers and users of the illicit products. They are vulnerable and easy to manipulate. Woods gave him presents like baseball caps that he claimed to have shoplifted. It continued for 4.5 months, after which the foot soldier introduced him to the Lieutenant. and that's when the scary knife against the groin incident occurred. The lieutenant interrogated Woods at length while holding the knife as detailed earlier. It was intimidating to flush out any mole. He managed to keep his cover despite the threat, but he wasn't this lucky the next day. Woods had backup from police officers in case something went wrong. There was a change in the team, and guess who becomes part of this undercover operation to replace one of the officers? Charlie Fletcher, the bent cop who was installed by Colin personally in the police. Woods' cover was almost blown now, but like any detective worth his salt, he had a hunch something was wrong with Fletcher. He informed his bosses, after which the bent cop was removed from the team. Now, why did Woods not trust Fletcher, the new replacement? Because he kept looking right onto the floor. The detective found it shifty that the cop was unable to meet his eyes. This incident also tells us that Woods was a sagacious detective, someone who knew his trade inside out. "I'm very glad that I trusted my instinct. That's how close I got," said Woods. After this scary hiccup, things made progress for the undercover cop. The lieutenant ran the Mansfield wing of Gunn's empire. Woods became a delivery driver, picking up ounces of crack from an address in the city and St Anne's. He collected information about the illicit trade, the networks and how the operations were. Around 90 arrests were based on his work. Woods never met Colin, but said that he was highly feared among the dealers and suppliers. In terms of his reputation, he was very good at building it up, he added. The most successful gangster is the one who is the most intimidating. It is the scary ones that are the ones that survive, said Woods. While the detective succeeded in bringing down the cartel, he spoke of regrets also. He felt that he did great harm to the small-time criminal who introduced him to the lieutenant. The man was on a suicide watch after his arrests because he seriously classed Woods as his only friend. What do you think about the conundrums Woods faced as an undercover cop? It's definitely not an easy job. What's Colin Gun doing in prison? Locked away in a high-security HMP Long Lartin, Worcestershire, Colin Gun hasn't relented in his fight with the legal system. Even in prison, he's managed to garner attention, making the news every few years. Recently, he made headlines for losing his High Court challenge. The notorious crime boss contested the Ministry of Justice's decision in 2023 not to downgrade his escape risk classification. The thug is not happy about his status of whether he poses a high risk of escape from prison. Unsurprisingly, it's exceptionally high. He requested the Ministry of Justice to downgrade his escape risk classification, which rejected the request. The Hood called this decision unfair and unlawful, eventually challenging it in court. He maintained that he experiences a significantly more intrusive and restrictive regime in the prison. However, the High Court dismissed Gunn's challenge and upheld the ministry's decision. The court had good reason to do so because intelligence was present that Colin was planning to escape prison with fellow inmate. What do you think of Colin's attempts at circumventing the justice system to get his way? He isn't admitting defeat, is he? But wait, there are even more egregious incidents of Colin troubling the law enforcement. In 2010, he complained to the prison's ombudsman and claimed to have won the right to be addressed as Mr. by prison staff. He even gloated about it in the prison magazine, stating, "Staff address me as Mr. Gunn," although they were very reluctant to do so at first. None of the prison staff like it, but that's tough, because they do not have a choice. You do not have to be humiliated by rude, ignorant prison staff any longer. Stand up for your rights. What's more, the Ombudsman agreed to his demands to have his official records of his behaviour in jail given to him without sensitive details being censored. These details included the names of staff who logged comments on his behaviour. 2 years later, he urged the fellow inmates at his then jail, HMP Belmarsh, to complain that they had been overcharged for sending A4 size mail. In 2013, he tried to corrupt a staff member to carry out an escape plan. At one point, he was using Facebook from prison and speaking to his friends and family, as well as threatening his enemies that he would reach them no matter where they went. Initially, he was masterminding his criminal network from the prison. He had to access mobile phones, SIM cards, narcotics and cash. These revelations show the flaws in the justice system at the time. What do you think about these astonishing loopholes in the prison system? Let us know in the comments. Notably, Gunn is serving a life sentence with a minimum term of 35 years that ends in 2040. His current escape classification reduces his chances of release on licence at the completion of his minimum term in 2040. Now, you can understand Colin's desperation to get his status downgraded. If it doesn't happen, he may spend his whole remaining life behind bars. Nottingham, more precisely the Bestwood estate, has taken a sigh of relief after Colin's incarceration. With him behind bars and David Gunn urging youngsters to avoid the path he and his brothers tread, it seemed the city has experienced relative calm for some time. While crime still exists as a menace in the city, it remains significantly lower than the levels in early 2000s. Will Colin Gunn be able to stay confined behind bars or find a way to mastermind the criminal activities again? Let us know your thoughts.